"Sir, is this your wallet?" The innocent voice made Alessandro Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in New York, stop in his tracks. He turned around and saw a little girl standing in the parking lot, holding tightly to the leather wallet she had just picked up. Alessandro quickly took it back and opened it to check. Every stack of cash was still there. His bank cards, identification, and every important document remained exactly where they belonged, with nothing missing. Alessandro stood frozen. Before him was only a little girl dressed in worn-out clothes, yet her eyes were bright, pure, and unwavering. She could have kept the money, and no one would ever have known. Instead, she chose to run after him simply to return something that didn't belong to her. Alessandro looked at her for a long moment, his eyes slowly filling with tears. It was the first time in many years that he realized that, in a world where money could buy almost anything, there was still something far more valuable than wealth, and he had no idea that this seemingly ordinary encounter was about to begin a journey that would change both of their lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. Alessandro reached into the wallet with steady fingers and drew out a folded stack of bills. He held it out toward the little girl, the paper crisp under the sodium glow of the parking lot lights. "For you," he said. "For being honest." Emma stepped back, her small hands clasped behind her spine, tucking themselves out of temptation's reach. She shook her head with a seriousness that did not belong to a face so young. "Mama said money that isn't yours isn't yours." Alessandro froze. It was the second time in less than a minute that a child had stopped him without meaning to. The wind blew cold across the asphalt, tugging at the tails of his overcoat. The lamps above cast their yellow light on the wet pavement, on his polished Oxfords, on the carrot-orange scarf wrapped twice around her small neck. Somewhere behind him, an engine idled low. Victor Bellini stepped forward from the black Cadillac. He leaned in close to Alessandro's ear, his voice low and careful. "Boss, let me have one of the men take her home. We're already off schedule." Alessandro brushed Victor's hand aside without turning his head. The gesture was small, but it was final. Victor stepped back, jaw tight, and said nothing more. Alessandro lowered himself onto one knee. Even kneeling, he was taller than she was. He met her eyes, and something in his chest tightened without permission. Emma's gaze had drifted down. She was looking at the wallet, still open in his hand. Then, without warning, she lifted one small finger and pointed at the photograph tucked behind the yellowed plastic sleeve. "Why do you have a picture of my mama?" The blood in Alessandro's veins went cold. He looked down slowly. He looked at the picture he had carried for 7 years, the picture he had never once replaced, never once taken out even when the edges began to soften from being touched. Sophia Carter, 23 years old, laughing under the sunlight at Coney Island. Her hair caught in the wind, a hot dog wrapper crumpled in her fist, a moment so ordinary that only love would have thought to preserve it. He tried to keep his voice level. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma," she said. "Emma Carter." The surname rang inside his skull like a bell struck in a still room. Carter, not another man's name, not a husband's name, her mother's name, Sophia's name. "And where is your mama, Emma?" She lifted her small arm and pointed across the street. A 4-story tenement building crouched behind a chain-link fence, its red brick weathered to the color of dried rust. A single window on the 3rd floor glowed dimly. Alessandro straightened. He turned his head just enough to speak over his shoulder. "Victor, wait in the car." "Boss, I should. Wait in the car." The tone left no space for argument. Victor stopped, folded his hands in front of him, and gave the smallest nod. Alessandro slipped the wallet into his coat pocket and offered his hand to the little girl. She took his index finger. They crossed the damp sidewalk together. He did not look back at the Cadillac. 2 questions were pounding inside his head like drums beaten by unseen hands. If Sophia had married, if she had built another life with another man, why did the child carry the Carter name? And why did those gray eyes, lifted up at him now under the streetlight, look so exactly, so painfully, like his own? Emma stopped in front of a peeling green door. She looked up at him. Her voice was small. "Sir, do you know my mama?" Alessandro did not answer her question. He could not. Instead, he crouched slightly, gentling his voice. "Tell me about your mama, Emma. What is she like?" The little girl brightened immediately, as though the question had unlocked a door she had been waiting to open. "She sews," Emma said, tugging him toward the stairwell. "She makes dresses for ladies who come to our door. And she sings when she cooks. All the time. Even when the songs are sad." She wrinkled her nose thoughtfully. "She never talks about my papa, though. Not ever." The last sentence lodged itself somewhere beneath Alessandro's ribs, sharp as glass. The stairwell smelled of old paint and someone's dinner 3 floors up. The banister was worn smooth by decades of hands. Emma climbed ahead of him, one small step at a time, still holding his index finger. "Mama made my scarf," she went on proudly, tugging at the carrot-orange wool around her neck. "She stayed up late 3 nights to finish it. And she stays up other nights too, to sew for the customers. That's how we pay for my school. She says school is the most important thing." Alessandro said nothing. He was watching her under the hallway light now, watching in the way a man watches something he has been afraid to see. The curls were Sophia's. The warm brown of her skin was Sophia's. But the cheekbones, the gray eyes, the particular way the jawline set when she concentrated, those belonged to a line that had been walking the streets of New York for 4 generations. He pushed the thought back down. It was too large. It would break him if he let it stand up straight. "Mama has a wooden box," Emma added as they turned onto the 3rd-floor landing. "A little one. She keeps it under her bed. She never lets me open it, even when I ask nicely." They passed a hand-lettered board mounted beside a row of buzzers. Alessandro's eyes moved across the names without meaning to. 3BS. Carter. Emma stopped in front of the apartment door. She dug a small brass key out of her coat pocket and held it up to him with the seriousness of a soldier reporting for duty. "Wait here first," she whispered. "Mama doesn't like surprises." He nodded, but she was too excited to remember her own rule. She pushed the door open a second later, and a warm breath of light and air escaped into the hallway, the smell of tea, of thread, of something baking in a small oven. From somewhere inside, from a kitchen he could not yet see, came a woman's voice. "Emma? Is that you, honey?" Alessandro stopped breathing. 7 years since he had heard that voice. 7 years of believing it belonged to a woman who had thrown him away without a reason, and now it was here, drifting out of a narrow apartment into a chipped hallway, calling for a child he had not known existed until 20 minutes ago. His feet would not move. Emma turned back and looked at him, her small face confused. "Sir? Are you coming in? My mama makes very good tea. She won't be mad." He tried to smile. His shoulders were locked. He set his palm against the doorframe to steady himself. 7 years stood in front of him, waiting to be crossed in a single step. It was the heaviest step of his life. Somewhere down the narrow inner hallway, slippers began to shuffle toward the door. Alessandro heard his own breath break as the shape of a woman came into view. Sophia stepped out of the narrow hallway with a dish towel still in her hands, mid-smile, expecting only her daughter. She was wiping her fingers on the corner of her apron. Her eyes lifted, and she froze. Alessandro was standing at the threshold of her home. The wallet was in his coat pocket. 7 years stood between them, and yet the distance was only 3 meters of scratched linoleum. The apartment went silent in a way that was almost physical. The clock above the stove ticked once, twice, 3 times, and each tick sounded like a hammer. Sophia went white beneath the warm brown of her skin. Her free hand shot out and gripped the doorframe of the kitchen, knuckles paling, her lips parted, but nothing came out. Whatever words she had rehearsed for a moment like this, if she had ever allowed herself to rehearse them, had abandoned her. Emma barreled in from the hallway, wrapped both arms around Sophia's leg, and beamed up at her with the pride of a child who has done a very grown-up thing. "Mama, he lost his wallet. I gave it back. He said he knows you." Alessandro did not take his eyes off Sophia. He stepped inside, only once, and closed the door behind him with the softness of a man who understood that everything in this room was made of glass. "Sophia," 2 syllables, 7 years. She recovered enough to bend down and touch her daughter's shoulder. "Baby, go upstairs. Get your coloring book from the shelf. I'll call you when it's time." Emma looked from her mother to the tall stranger, hesitated, then obeyed the way good children do when they sense that the air in a room has changed. Her small footsteps padded up the narrow stairwell to the sleeping loft above. The moment the last footfall faded, Sophia inhaled for what seemed the first time. "What are you doing here?" Her voice trembled. It was not a question. "I don't know," Alessandro said. "I followed her." He pulled the wallet from his coat and opened it on the small kitchen table between them. He turned it so the photograph faced her. His finger touched the plastic sleeve, gently, as if the picture might tear from being seen. She pointed at this. "Sophia, she called you Mama." He looked at her then, and his voice broke Alessandro Moretti, whose voice had not broken in 15 years of a life built on control, whose voice men had learned to fear because it never rose above a whisper. It broke now. "Sophia, tell me the truth. Is she mine?" Her hand flew to her mouth. She took one step backward, then another, until her spine met the kitchen wall. The tears began without warning, without noise, sliding down her cheeks in the quiet, disciplined way of a woman who had spent 7 years teaching herself not to make a sound when she wept. She could not speak. Alessandro stepped forward once. He did not reach for her. He did not dare. Please, just say it. Yes or no. Sophia lifted her face to the ceiling. She closed her eyes. She swallowed something that was not air. Then she looked back at him into the eyes she had loved 7 years ago and had spent 7 years trying to forget. Yes. Her voice was barely there. She's yours, Alessandro. She's always been yours. He did not fall, but his legs stopped, the way a tree stops standing the moment its trunk has been cut. He set his palm flat on the tabletop to keep himself upright. 6 birthdays, 6 Christmases, 6 baby teeth, 6 first steps. All of it came at him at once, an entire flood breaking through a wall he had not known he was still holding shut. Sophia crossed the small kitchen and set her hand on his shoulder, the first touch in 7 years, and whispered, "Sit down. I'll tell you everything." Sophia guided him to the old kitchen chair with the worn cushion. She pulled a second chair out for herself, then walked to the stove and lifted the kettle from the back burner. The water was still hot from Emma's afternoon snack. She poured a cup for him, added nothing to it because she remembered he took it plain, and set the cup down in front of him with hands that betrayed her only in the smallest tremor. She sat. She laid both hands on the table, palms flat. She did not look at him yet. She began. 7 years ago, a week before you were going to bring me to meet your mother. Alessandro said nothing. He did not touch the tea. She came to me first. Sophia paused. Her voice was low and even, the voice of a woman untying a bandage from a wound that had long since sealed over. There was a small cafe in Queens. She asked me to meet her there. She did not shout. She did not threaten me the way people threaten in movies. She sat across from me with a cup of espresso and told me, very calmly, that I did not belong in the Moretti family, that I was a black girl, the daughter of an electrician from Queens, with no Italian blood, no family name that meant anything to anyone, that I would only be a shadow across your future. Alessandro closed his eyes for a long moment. He did not open them. Then she slid a folder across the table. Sophia's voice stayed level, but her fingers curled slightly against the wood. Inside it were the addresses of my parents' house, the name of my brother's school, the garage where my father worked every day. She did not have to say a word after that. The folder said everything for her, and then she told me, and I remember the exact sentence. She said, "If you truly love Alessandro, you will understand that love sometimes means disappearing." The clock ticked above the stove. I was silent for 2 days. I did not eat. I did not answer your calls. He remembered those 2 days. He had thought she was busy. He had thought nothing of it. On the 3rd day, I wrote you the letter, the one you kept, if you kept it. I wrote every word knowing you would believe I had stopped loving you. That was the point. It was the only shield I had left for my family. She lifted her eyes now, briefly, and then dropped them again. Your mother had bought me a ticket to Chicago. I used it. 3 weeks after I arrived, I found out I was carrying Emma. Her breath caught. Just once. I picked up the phone to call you so many times that first week. I would dial half your number and stop, and every time I stopped, I saw that folder again, so I put the phone down. I gave birth to her alone in a community hospital on the south side. When the nurse asked for the father's name, I left the space empty, not out of anger, Alessandro, to protect her. I did not know what your world might do to a child who could be traced back to you. 6 years, just me and her. I sewed for a living. I taught her that her father was a good man who lived far away and who did not know she existed, and that this was not his fault. 3 months ago, I moved back to Brooklyn because the schools here were better. I never went near Manhattan. I never let myself walk in your direction. Until this afternoon, when a little girl chased a stranger across a parking lot. Alessandro sat perfectly still. He had not interrupted her once. When she stopped speaking, he set his hand over hers on the table. Nothing more. The touch she had waited 7 years for. He kept it there. From the loft above, small footsteps began to descend the stairs, Emma coming down, her coloring book pressed to her chest, unaware that the whole shape of her life had just changed beneath her. Alessandro lifted his face at the sound of the small footsteps on the stairs. He had not wiped his eyes. He did not have time. His eyes were red-rimmed and bright, and he did not care. He looked at Sophia for a long moment. Then he asked, in a voice softer than she had ever heard him use, the questions a father was supposed to have known the answers to years ago. Was she healthy when she was born? Sophia nodded. 2 months early, but healthy. Did you have anyone with you? She shook her head. Just me. He swallowed. What was her first word? Sophia smiled faintly. Through tears she had stopped trying to hide. Star. Alessandro closed his eyes. 7 years he had lived with the wrong story. 7 years he had carried the belief that Sophia had betrayed him, and had allowed that belief to make him colder, harder, further away from the man he had once been. Each year he had laid another brick around his heart and told himself it was strength. And while he had been doing that in New York, in Chicago there had been a small girl teething, taking her first steps, saying her first word to a ceiling, and he had not been there. Some men lose fortunes, some lose empires, but the cruelest theft of all is time, the years a father does not know he is a father, the birthdays that pass without a candle lit in his name, the first words spoken to a ceiling instead of to his chest. Emma appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her coloring book pressed against her chest. She looked at the two adults. She saw her mother's red eyes, and the tall stranger's red eyes, and her small face folded into confusion. "Mama, are you sick?" Sophia shook her head quickly and opened her arms. "No, sweetheart, I'm not sick. I was just talking with an old friend." Emma tilted her head. She turned her gray eyes toward Alessandro, and the tilt of her head at that moment was a gesture Alessandro's own father had made 1,000 times in the mirror. "Sir, do you make my mama cry?" His throat closed. He could not answer that. Not the way she meant, not the way he meant. He lowered himself to one knee, and slowly opened both arms. He did not expect her to come. She had known him for 10 minutes. He had no right. But Emma looked to her mother, and Sophia gave the smallest nod. And then Emma stepped forward, hesitated for a single breath, and walked into his arms as if she had been walking into them her whole life. Alessandro held his daughter for the first time. He set his hand against the back of her small head, and cupped her curls the way he had watched other men cup the heads of their children in restaurants and parks over the years, always feeling like a stranger looking through a window. He breathed her in. She smelled of baby shampoo and the faint dry scent of sewing thread from her mother's apron. It was the smell he had missed for 6 years without knowing what it was. She pressed her cheek against the lapel of his coat and asked no more questions. She was old enough to understand that something serious was happening, and old enough to keep quiet inside it. Sophia stood beside them, one hand pressed to her mouth, weeping silently the way she had learned to weep. Alessandro whispered into his daughter's hair, meant more for himself than for anyone, but loud enough for Sophia to hear. "I'm not letting either of you go this time, I promise." Emma pulled back just a little in his arms. She looked up at him with the solemn, direct eyes of a 6-year-old who had been waiting a long time for this exact question. "Sir, are you going to be my papa now?" Alessandro did not answer her right away. He could not. The words were too heavy to lift with anything less than his whole life. He looked at Sophia instead. Her face was still wet, but she was watching him with a stillness that was almost a question of its own. After a long moment, she gave a small, slow nod. He turned back to his daughter. He kept his voice low. "Yes, Emma. If your mama says yes, I will." Emma smiled. It was the plain, unremarkable smile of a child who had never had a father, but who had never quite stopped believing that one might arrive. He did not leave the apartment that night. He made 3 quiet phone calls from the small kitchen. The first was to Enzo Ricci, telling him to bring an armored SUV to the corner of the block within the hour. No questions. No visible convoy. The second was to have the east guest wing of the Long Island estate quietly prepared. The third was to Victor, who was still waiting somewhere in the Cadillac, and he told Victor to go home. Victor's voice at the other end sounded, for a moment, as if it wanted to argue. Then it obeyed. He asked Sophia if she would come with him. Not forever, just until he could handle what needed to be handled with his family. She refused at first. She had rebuilt her life alone for 6 years, and she did not want a life that depended on any man ever again. Alessandro did not argue. He only said, "Then I will come here every day, but I am not walking out of her life a second time." Sophia was silent for a long time. Then she nodded, not because she needed him, but because Emma deserved to know him. They packed lightly. A few of Emma's picture books, the carrot orange scarf, a small wooden box of old photographs that Sophia had never once let anyone open, a stuffed rabbit named Biscuit whose ears had been sewn back on more than once. On the way down to the SUV, Emma walked beside Alessandro. She did not take his whole hand the way small children usually do. She reached out and closed her small fingers around only his index finger, carefully, as though she were afraid that if she asked for too much, the whole thing might vanish. Alessandro bent his knees and opened his palm to her. She gripped tighter and smiled up at him. In the car, Emma slept against her mother's shoulder within 10 minutes. Alessandro watched her in the rearview mirror. He did not look away, Sophia spoke quietly. You need to know. Your mother has not changed her mind. Not in 7 years. Alessandro nodded. I'll handle it. First thing in the morning. Sophia said nothing more. She only turned her face toward the window. Outside, the New York streetlights slid past in yellow streaks, 7 years compressed into one long midnight drive. They passed through the Moretti gates just after 3 in the morning. Enzo met them in the front hall. He looked at the child and the woman his boss was leading in by the hand, and he asked nothing. He only bowed his head to Sophia with a courtesy that suggested she had been expected all his life, and led the two of them up to the east wing. Sophia stopped at the doorway of the guest room and turned back. She did not speak, but her eyes told him she was still not entirely sure any of this was real. Alessandro nodded. His voice was soft. Sleep. I'm in the room across the hall. The door is open. She closed hers. Alessandro stood alone in the dark corridor. He looked down at his own hand, the hand that a small girl had gripped by one finger for the whole ride. For the first time in 15 years of being what he was, he felt something he had not felt before. There was someone in the world who needed him to protect them. Not because it was business, but because it was love. In the morning, he would face the woman who had stolen 7 years from him, and he already knew his mother would not apologize easily. The estate was unusually quiet in the morning. The kind of quiet that made a man used to silence realize that his silence had never been peaceful. It had only been empty. Emma woke in the strange guest room with the high ceiling and the wide windows that looked out onto a garden she had never seen before. She sat up. She looked at Biscuit. Biscuit did not have any explanations, so she slid down from the tall bed, patted across the cold marble in her small socks, and went looking for her mother. She found Sophia in the kitchen with Alessandro. He was not wearing a suit. He wore a plain white shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and he was standing at the stove trying to make eggs. From the smell in the room, it was the second attempt. The first pan was already scraped clean and hidden in the sink. Sophia laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the first sound of that shape he had heard from her in 7 years. She crossed to the stove, took the pan out of his hand, and started again. Emma climbed up onto the tall stool at the counter and watched the two adults with the serious face of a child trying to understand the new rules of her own world. Papa, she said, are you going to be here every day now? She had shifted from sir to papa between falling asleep and waking up, as naturally as if the decision had been made for her in a dream. Alessandro swallowed something before he answered. Yes, Emma, she thought about that. Papa, can you teach me to ride a bike? Mama says I'm old enough. He looked at Sophia. She gave a small nod. Yes, he said. I'll teach you. This weekend. They sat at the long walnut table together. It was the same table Alessandro sat at every morning of his life. Alone. He had never quite noticed how large it was until this morning, when 3 people occupied it, and it still had room for the ghosts of all the people it had been built to hold. Sophia poured him a cup of coffee. She added half a teaspoon of sugar, no more. Exactly the way he had taken it 7 years ago. He noticed. She noticed him noticing. Neither of them said anything. Some small details do not get erased by time. They simply wait. Enzo Ricci passed the open doorway on his way to the security wing. He glanced in and saw the 3 of them, and he smiled, the first real smile that had crossed his face in months. He said nothing to anyone. He continued down the hall and, in his own quiet way, he thanked the small girl who had brought his boss home. 10 minutes later, Victor Bellini appeared in the kitchen with the morning's financial reports tucked under one arm. He greeted Sophia with a warmth that seemed practiced only in the way that any polished thing seems practiced. He inclined his head to Emma. He set the folder in front of Alessandro. Congratulations, Don. Enzo told me a little of what happened last night. A good piece of news, if I may say so. The smile he wore was warm. It did not look like a mask. It never did. Alessandro thanked him. Sophia, being Sophia, offered him a cup of coffee. She did it easily and without suspicion, because there was no reason for suspicion. Victor declined with a small, polite gesture, mentioning work. But as he turned to leave, his eyes stopped for a fraction of a second too long on the carrot-orange scarf draped over the back of Emma's stool. No one saw it. Emma was busy asking Alessandro why his eggs were burned while her mother's were not. Sophia was laughing. Alessandro was memorizing this moment, the first breakfast in his adult life, to contain the sound of a child's laughter in his kitchen. Out in the front hall, Victor took out his phone. He typed a short message to a number that had no name saved to it. She is back. The child is with her. Await instructions. He slipped the phone into his pocket and walked out into the cold morning. Inside the kitchen, Alessandro looked up at the wall clock. It was time to go and see his mother. Lucia Moretti's estate on the Upper East Side was white and cold, the perfect opposite of the warm kitchen Alessandro had left behind an hour earlier. The morning sun fell through tall windows onto polished marble and did not warm any of it. She received him in the drawing room with a small porcelain cup of mint tea. She was already seated when he entered. She did not rise. He did not sit. He walked to the low table between them and placed the old photograph on the surface, the picture from the wallet, Sophia and himself, 7 years ago, on a bright afternoon at Coney Island. Lucia glanced down at it. Then she looked up at her son. She did not ask a single question. She knew. He could see in her stillness that she had known before he walked in. He spoke without warmth. 7 years, Mama. 7 years you took from me, and you took a daughter I did not even know I had. Lucia set her teacup down slowly on its saucer. She did not deny anything. She did not lower her eyes. She used the same measured voice she had always used when she believed she was defending the family. Everything I did was for the Moretti name. She was not one of us. She would have destroyed you. Alessandro let out a short, bitter laugh. She destroyed nothing, Mama. You did, he told her, quietly and clearly, that Emma was her granddaughter by blood, that the Moretti line ran through the veins of the small girl who was at that very moment making biscotti dough in his kitchen, that whether Lucia acknowledged it or not was no longer a matter Lucia would be permitted to decide. He told her that Sophia and Emma would live under his roof, not for approval, not for permission, and that no one, including his own mother, held any authority over that arrangement any longer. Lucia sat silent, her face carved from stone. She did not apologize. She did not weep. She did not soften. At last, she said, in a low, deliberate voice, "You will regret this. You do not understand our world the way I understand it." Alessandro stopped at the doorway. He turned his head just enough to look back at her, the woman who had given him life, and had also stolen from him the greatest happiness of it. "I have regretted every day I listened to you, Mama, but today I stop listening." He walked out. Lucia sat alone in the enormous, gleaming room. She reached for the teacup. Her hand shook. She set the cup back on its saucer before the tea could spill. She looked down at the photograph her son had left behind Sophia at 23, laughing in the sunlight, and for a moment that only the empty room witnessed, something passed across Lucia Moretti's face that she had forbidden herself to feel for 7 years. Then she shook her head. She slid the photograph into the top drawer of the side table and closed it. She would not permit herself weakness. Not today. At the Long Island estate, Sophia was teaching Emma to shape biscotti in the kitchen. The small girl stood on a low stool with flour to her elbows, giggling as her mother showed her how to roll the dough into thin logs. Enzo Ricci passed the doorway, saw them, and smiled to himself before continuing on. Out at the front gate, Victor Bellini was answering a call from inside his black car. He listened. He said very little. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his coat. Then he walked to the security wing, sat down at the console, and pulled up the full estate blueprint, every exit, every camera, every blind angle. He made careful notes in a small leather book. Nobody noticed him. 3 days passed so peacefully that Alessandro began to believe the storm had passed until the morning of the 4th day, when he had to leave for a meeting downtown and leave his 2 women at home. On the 4th day, Alessandro had to leave for a meeting downtown. It was with a group of European partners and had been on the calendar for 3 months. There was no way to postpone it. Before he left, he asked Sophia and Emma not to step outside the estate. Sophia agreed without argument. She had learned in one night how carefully her new life would need to be guarded. Enzo Ricci was on the main gate. Victor Bellini would coordinate internal security. Alessandro kissed the top of Emma's head at the front door. She was still in her small yellow pajamas. Around noon, Sophia found Enzo in the front hall. Her voice was apologetic. She had forgotten her sewing measurement notebook in the Brooklyn apartment, the one that held every client's measurements down to the 1/4 inch. She had a rush order due at the end of the week. She would only need an hour. Enzo hesitated. He picked up his phone and dialed Alessandro. Alessandro's line was silent. The meeting had begun and the phone had gone dark on his end. Victor, standing at the door of the security office, heard the exchange. He stepped into the hall with an easy smile and offered to accompany her. He mentioned a matter in that part of Brooklyn he had been meaning to handle in person. It was, he said, on his way. Enzo hesitated a moment longer, but Victor was the consigliere. Victor had walked at Alessandro's shoulder for 15 years. There was no reason under this roof to distrust him. Enzo agreed. He sent 2 of his own men with them anyway, out of habit, not suspicion. They left in Victor's black car at 12:30. When Alessandro returned to the estate at 4 in the afternoon, the silence in the halls felt wrong the moment he stepped inside. He called Sophia's name. No answer. He called Emma's. No answer. He found Enzo. Enzo told him that Sophia and Emma had gone with Victor to Brooklyn just after noon and should have been back by 2. Alessandro called Victor. The line rang once, then died. He redialed, straight to voicemail. He called the 2 guards. Neither of them picked up. He grabbed his keys. He drove himself to Brooklyn. He did not use a driver. He tore through the tunnel at speeds that would have earned another man a squad car. His knuckles were white on the wheel. The apartment door was standing partly open when he arrived. He pushed it wide. Inside, everything was almost the same. The wooden box of old photographs sat undisturbed on the small kitchen table. A kettle on the stove was still warm. A teacup rested beside it, empty, as if someone had been about to pour and had been interrupted. Near the doorway, on the floor, lay Emma's carrot-orange scarf, crumpled, twisted in the middle, torn slightly along one edge as though it had been ripped from a small neck in the middle of a struggle. Alessandro bent and picked it up. His blood went cold. There was a small, dark stain in the wool. Not the color of an adult's blood, the color of a child's from a scrape, perhaps, or a split lip. It might have been nothing, but it was enough to strip him of every layer of self-control he had built over 15 years, and it did it in 3 seconds. He called Victor again. This time Victor answered on the second ring. His voice was calm, professional, his breathing only slightly quicker than normal but under control. "Boss, I dropped them at the apartment as promised. Then I got an urgent call about the Genovese matter and had to move. The 2 men were posted outside. I just spoke with them. They said Miss Sophia asked them to go pick up lunch for her and the child. When they came back, the apartment was empty." Alessandro hung up in the middle of the sentence. Something was very, very wrong. He called Enzo. He ordered every street camera within a 3-hour window of that block pulled up immediately. Enzo arrived 15 minutes later, a laptop under his arm, and his face gone pale. Enzo set the laptop on Sophia's small kitchen table and turned it toward Alessandro. The footage came from the surveillance camera of the Italian bakery across the street. The owner was an old friend of Enzo's, and had sent the original file within 10 minutes of the request. The timestamp read 2:47 in the afternoon. A black Mercedes S-Class rolled slowly into frame and stopped in front of the building. It was not one of Alessandro's cars. It was not one of Victor's. Alessandro leaned forward and studied the license plate. He recognized it at once, a small numeric sequence he had memorized years ago without meaning to. It was the second Mercedes that belonged to his mother, the one she kept in her private garage, the one she used only for errands she did not want anyone to know about. Enzo slowed the frame rate. Sophia stepped out through the apartment door, one arm around Emma, a cloth bag hanging from the other hand. Her face was tense but not panicked. Emma clung to her side and looked up at the car with wide eyes. A tall man in a long overcoat stepped out of the passenger seat of the Mercedes. A wool beret was pulled low, hiding most of his face. He opened the rear door and said something to Sophia. Sophia hesitated. She looked up and down the street. She seemed to be searching for the 2 guards who should have been posted at the curb. There was no one. The man gestured toward the car and spoke again. Sophia looked down at her daughter, and then she stepped forward and lifted Emma into the back seat, following her in. The door closed. The Mercedes pulled away and turned toward the Manhattan Bridge. Alessandro rose from the chair. His blood was on fire in a way it had not been in 15 years. He knew what his mother was capable of when she believed she was protecting the family name, but abducting her own granddaughter, her own son's child? He would not have thought her capable until he remembered the way she had looked at him 3 days ago in her drawing room. "You will regret this." Her exact words, delivered in the exact voice she had used, once, to deliver a warning to a rival family's wife, who had died in a car accident 3 weeks later. He no longer doubted it. She had done this. He called Bruno Salvato. He gave the order clearly and coldly. 2 teams of 7 men each. Full armament. Meet at the estate gate at 8:30. He was going to the Upper East Side tonight. He was going to bring his family home. He called Victor Bellini next. Victor picked up on the second ring. His voice, when he understood what had happened, filled with fury. "Boss, I'm on my way back to Long Island right now. I'll rendezvous with the teams at the gate. I am going with you to see her. This is not something you should walk into alone." Alessandro thanked him. In that moment, he believed he had at least one man left at his side who would not falter. Enzo asked, carefully, whether they should involve the police. Alessandro shook his head. This was family. There would be no strangers. He called Dr. Marcello Falcone and told him to have the private surgical bay ready. Falcone asked no questions. He had served the Moretti family for 20 years and knew when it was not the moment for them. 6 black cars left the Long Island estate at 9 o'clock. Alessandro rode in the front passenger seat of the lead vehicle, the carrot-orange scarf clenched in his fist. Victor rode in the rear of the second car, coordinating over the radio. The small stain on the wool had dried into a deep russet. Alessandro thought of Emma's face at breakfast the morning before, the way she had asked him about riding a bike, the way she had shifted from sir to papa in a single night, as if the decision had been simple. If anything happened to that child tonight, if anything happened to either of them, he would not forgive his mother for as long as he lived. The convoy turned onto the quiet Upper East Side street. Alessandro looked up through the windshield. The lights of his mother's estate were blazing at 9 at night, in a way they never blazed at 9 at night, and the main gate stood wide open. Alessandro drew his sidearm from its holster. It was the first time he had ever done that in front of his mother's house in his life. The convoy stopped 30 meters short of the gate. Alessandro raised his hand and split the men with 3 quick gestures. Enzo took the left flank. Bruno took the right. Victor moved to the center, directly beside him. 7 men advanced into the front courtyard in a fan formation. Alessandro walked at the point. The main gate had been broken open. He looked at the hinges as they crossed the threshold. They had not been kicked. They had been cut through with a portable saw, quietly, cleanly, by professionals working from a plan. A guard lay near the row of ornamental cypress trees along the drive. His collar was dark with blood. He was not going to get up. Alessandro's jaw tightened. This one had been the son of one of his father's oldest men. They pushed forward into the main hall. The chandeliers were still burning. 3 more guards lay on the marble. The blood was still fresh, still running toward the seams in the tile. The attack had happened within the hour. A tall Chinese porcelain vase, his mother's favorite piece, purchased at auction 30 years ago, lay shattered across the entryway. Victor knelt beside one of the fallen men and pressed 2 fingers to the side of his neck. His face wore the exact right shade of quiet grief. He did it naturally enough that no one in the room had any reason to think it was anything but real. All 3 of them are gone, boss. Not more than 45 minutes. Alessandro did not answer. He turned and took the stairs 2 at a time. Victor followed him. His mother's bedroom was empty. The wall safe was open. Not broken. Not drilled. Opened by combination. There was no sign of struggle at the door. Whoever had entered this room had either known the code or Lucia herself had opened it under pressure. Alessandro turned slowly in the room, trying to make the pieces fit. If his mother had been the one who arranged the Brooklyn kidnapping, then who had done this? Who had taken her? Was this the Genovese family, moving to settle an old debt? Was this some opportunistic rival striking while she was distracted with Sophia? Nothing lined up. He called out for Enzo and Bruno. Both appeared in the doorway a moment later, weapons up. Split the men, Alessandro said. Search everything. Ground floor, 3rd floor, basement, garden. She may still be here. Enzo and Bruno nodded once each. They peeled off in opposite directions, each taking 2 men with them. For a short, ordinary handful of seconds, only Alessandro and Victor remained in Lucia's bedroom. Alessandro stood with his back to Victor. He looked down into the open safe and tried to force the shape of the picture to make sense. He spoke his thoughts aloud, tired, letting himself sound tired because Victor was in the room, and Victor had walked beside him for 15 years, and there was no need to hold a mask up in front of Victor. Victor, this is more complicated than I thought. If Mama was the one who took Sophia in Brooklyn, who took her? Someone else is playing both of us. He did not see Victor's face, but in the tall Baroque mirror that hung on the wall across from him, the mirror his mother used every morning to adjust the drape of her shawl, he saw everything. Victor stood behind him. The careful sorrow that had been on his features downstairs was gone. His face had cooled into something Alessandro had never seen there in 15 years. Victor's hand was moving, quietly, drawing the beretta from the shoulder holster beneath the tailored vest, raising it, aiming, without shake, at the base of Alessandro's skull, not to protect him, to kill him. Alessandro did not turn his head. He did not let his shoulders change. He kept speaking in the same tired tone for 2 more seconds, while his right hand lowered its grip on the pistol at his side, and his thumb slid, gentle as a whisper, onto the safety. In the mirror, Victor's finger began to tighten on the trigger. That was when Alessandro moved. Alessandro threw himself to the left the instant Victor's finger tightened. The first shot cracked the air. The bullet punched straight through the tall window behind him and shattered the glass into the night. He hit the floor rolling, his own weapon coming up in the same motion, and returned fire from the ground, but the angle was wrong. His round only grazed the sleeve of Victor's left arm, before burying itself in the plaster of the far wall. Victor was already moving. In one fluid slide, he was behind the massive oak wardrobe, out of sight and perfectly covered. Alessandro scrambled to his feet, and threw himself behind the far bedpost of the tall four-poster bed. From across the room he heard Victor laugh softly, almost politely, a cold, amused sound he had never once heard from the man in 15 years of trusting him. "You're slower than I remember, Dawn. Maybe it's from 7 years at a desk instead of a trigger." Alessandro did not answer. He was measuring. The bedpost to the main doorway was 4 meters, not enough cover between. Victor to the doorway was the same distance, but Victor was closer to the servants' passage on the far wall. Alessandro forced himself to stop feeling. He forced himself to stop being a man whose consigliere of 15 years had just tried to blow the back of his head off. There was no time for what that would cost him later. There was only geometry now. 2 more shots cracked from Victor's side. They punched into the bedpost. Splinters of walnut sprayed across the pillow. Alessandro pressed himself lower and did not fire back yet. He was waiting to hear Victor move again. A third round from Victor caught the tall Baroque mirror on the wall, the same mirror that had saved his life 10 seconds earlier. It burst apart in a rain of silver shards that fell across the polished floor like ice. Then Victor began to move. Not to retreat, to close. Alessandro heard something else at the same moment, footsteps on the main staircase. At least 2 more men climbing toward this room. Victor was not alone in this house. He had never been alone. Victor had arranged for reinforcements to already be inside the estate before Alessandro's convoy had ever pulled up to the gate. The trap had been set the moment Victor had offered to come. Alessandro crawled to the right side of the bed and found a shooting angle across the leg of the frame. He saw a slice of Victor's shoulder past the wardrobe. He fired 3 rapid shots. 1 hit the wardrobe, 2 struck the wall. Victor answered instantly. A round tore through the left panel of Alessandro's vest at his ribs, no flesh, but close enough that he heard the fabric split against his own skin. He knew the next one would find him. Blood was already running from his hip. A shard of the mirror had opened a shallow gash there when he had gone down. It was not serious, but it was one more thing. He knew he was losing this room. Victor had cover. Victor had reinforcements inside the house. Victor had had days to plan every angle. Alessandro had 13 rounds left in his pistol and no time. From the floor below, gunfire erupted all at once. Not 1 weapon, not 2, 10. His own men had been ambushed in the main hall. Enzo and Bruno were pinned down. There would be no reinforcements coming up the stairs. Victor moved closer. Alessandro heard the sound of his shoes on the broken mirror, slow, unhurried. The walk of a man who already knew the outcome of the room. Alessandro did not answer him with words. He needed 30 seconds. 30 seconds was all he was asking the world for. He looked around the bedroom. The window at the back was already shattered from the first shot. Beyond it, the second-floor balcony ran along the garden side of the house. Below that, a 5-meter drop to the flagstones. He would break both legs if he jumped. He had 2 spare magazines in his inner coat pocket. He thought of Emma. He thought of Sophia. He thought of his mother. Wherever she was, he could not die in this room. He shifted his weight toward the window and started to measure the distance, and in that instant, from the main hall below, a great splintering crash of glass rose up through the floor, followed by Enzo Ricci's voice shouting his name. Enzo and Bruno had driven a heavy marble entry table straight through the leaded glass panels of the front hall. Shards of crystal and stone burst across the floor in a wave. Enzo's shout rose up the stairwell like a signal flare, and for half a second, Victor's head turned toward the sound. Half a second was enough. Alessandro broke from behind the bedpost. He fired 4 rapid rounds toward the oak wardrobe, not to hit Victor but to force him to duck, then sprinted for the door and out into the upper corridor. He did not chase. He knew Victor's game now. Every corner in this house had been rehearsed. If he pursued, he would die on a floor his own family had built. He took the main staircase in 3 long strides. The lower hall had become a battlefield. Bruno was firing from behind one of the enormous marble columns, muzzle flashes lighting the room in strobes. 2 of the loyal guards lay at his feet. One was no longer breathing. The other still was, but his left thigh was soaked black. Enzo was cutting a corridor of fire at the main entrance, his right sleeve torn open from shoulder to elbow, red running to his cuff whose blood no one could say for sure. Alessandro dropped into the fight. He took 2 of the attackers near the base of the stairs with 2 clean shots each. Enzo shouted to him through the noise, "Boss, they know the whole layout. Somebody gave them the blueprints. They even know where the camera blind spots are." Alessandro did not need him to finish. He already knew. "Victor!" he shouted back. "It's Victor! Fall back!" For one heartbeat, both Enzo and Bruno froze. The name hit them like a physical blow. Then, without one further word, they moved. Neither of them asked why. Neither of them questioned. In their world, When the dawn said a man had turned, that man had turned. The three of them fell into a tight rolling formation, driving toward the rear garden doors. They lost 2 more men in the corridor doing it. Bruno took a round through the outer thigh and did not slow. He fired as he limped, cursing under his teeth in low, steady Italian. A round chipped marble, a hand's breadth from Alessandro's ear. They reached the rear terrace. Enzo threw open the garden door with his shoulder. They ran. Enzo had hidden a spare SUV in the small auxiliary garage on the west side of the property years ago, on a habit of never trusting a single vehicle. He had never told Victor about it. Now that habit saved their lives. They piled in. Bruno took the wheel, one hand still cradling his own thigh. Alessandro slammed into the back seat, his hands dark with blood that was not his, the carrot-orange scarf clenched in one fist. He looked across at Enzo, panting. He told them, in 6 sentences, about the mirror. Enzo's face went bloodless. Bruno swore once, low, into the steering wheel. Alessandro went on. His voice was flat now. He had passed all the way through shock and out the other side. Sophia, Emma, Mama, 3 lives. Victor has 3 lives in his hands, and now he knows that we know. Bruno spoke through gritted teeth as he cut the SUV onto the Belt Parkway. Boss, we need a safe hole, right now, not Long Island. Victor knows every way in and every way out of that estate, Alessandro thought. There was only one place left, the old warehouse in Red Hook. His father had bought it in the winter of 1986, under a name no one had ever traced back to the family. It appeared on no ledger. His father had used it in the years when the Genovese had wanted him dead, and had taught his 15-year-old son how a Moretti survived being hunted. Victor had never been shown it. Victor did not know it existed. The SUV tore into the night. Streetlights blurred past the windows in streaks. In the back seat, Alessandro pulled out his phone. He checked the screen once to confirm the GPS was still disabled. He had killed it the moment he had left his mother's estate. At that exact instant, the phone buzzed in his hand. A video message, from a number that had no name. Alessandro opened the video. The footage was dim. A single bulb swung from a chain over a bare concrete floor, throwing light and long-moving shadows. A warehouse, empty pallets stacked along one wall. Lucia was tied to a wooden chair. Her upper lip was split. Her hair had come loose from its usual severe knot and fell across her shoulders. Her tailored coat was wrinkled and dust-streaked, but her chin was up. Whatever they had done to her before the camera turned on, she had refused to let herself weep for it now. She did not perform her fear for anyone. Sophia was in the chair beside her. She held Emma, pressed tight against her chest, arms locked around the small body as if the strength of her grip alone could shield her daughter from what came next. Emma was trembling. She was not crying. Alessandro understood in one glance why she was not crying. She was 6 years old, and she had already understood that in this room, crying would make things worse. The camera swung. Victor stepped into frame. He held a Beretta at his side. His right shoulder was hastily bandaged, but Alessandro saw it now, and he understood. And something inside him hardened another degree. That was not the wound from the graze he had put across Victor's left sleeve upstairs. That bandage was from a wood splinter, from when Alessandro's own bullet had chewed into the side of the oak wardrobe. Victor was staging the injury for the camera. A wound Alessandro was meant to think he had caused. A small false detail meant to make him hesitate a fraction of a second when the moment came. Victor smiled at the lens. His voice was measured, almost warm. Alessandro, 3 lives. Your mother, the woman you love, your own daughter. If you want all 3 of them to walk out of here alive, you come alone. Terminal 9, Brooklyn Docks, before dawn. No men, no police. If I see even one shadow behind you, I shoot Sophia first. Then the child. Then your mother. The clock has started. 4 hours. The video ended. Bruno's knuckles were white on the wheel. Enzo said nothing. Alessandro turned his face to the window and stared out into the streaming dark of the parkway. He knew Victor would not honor a word of it. Even if he walked in with empty hands, Victor would kill all 4 of them. Victor had to kill him to take the throne. Victor had to kill Sophia and Lucia and Emma because none of them could be left to speak. Walking in alone was not surrender. It was an execution of his whole family. But not walking in or walking in with a visible column of men would put a bullet through Sophia's head at the moment of contact. He needed a third answer. His mind slid, without permission, without effort, into the cold, analytic gear that had kept him alive for 15 years, the one that had once been a survival tool, and had become, after Sophia, the only place inside himself he still knew how to live. He had 4 hours. He needed a quiet rescue. He needed a way in that Victor had not planned for. Terminal 9. His father had used that warehouse to move contraband liquor in the early 70s, back when the harbor was still a rougher place than the city above it. Alessandro knew the interior geometry of that building better than Victor did. He knew about the storm drain tunnel that ran from the seawall directly into the sub-basement. Only 2 men had ever known about that tunnel. His father, and him. He tapped Bruno's shoulder. Bruno cut the SUV to the curb of a quiet Red Hook side street. Alessandro stepped out onto the sidewalk. The wind off the water was cold and smelled of salt and diesel. He made his calls from the dark. He called only the men he had raised from teenagers, the men who had eaten at his table for more than 10 years. Not the paid soldiers, not the recent hires, the old ones, the ones bound by memory, not payroll. He made 12 calls in 6 minutes. 11 of them picked up. Every one of them answered with the same single sentence. "I'm coming, Don." "Where?" He gave them coordinates. A derelict warehouse 400 meters west of Victor's chosen meeting point. No branded vehicles, no long guns. Sidearms and blades only. Assembled and silent before dawn. Meanwhile, 400 meters east, inside the warehouse at Terminal 9, something else was quietly beginning to happen. Sophia Moretti, a woman who had never bowed her head to anyone in 62 years of living, was looking at the small granddaughter she had never held, and her eyes had begun to fill. Inside the dark warehouse, Lucia sat bound to the wooden chair beside Sophia. Emma had been placed on the cold concrete between the 2 chairs, and Sophia had wrapped her one free arm around the small body to shield her from the drafts that slid through the metal walls. Emma did not cry. She was too clever to cry in front of men with guns. But she was shivering. Victor and his lieutenants had stepped out. They were somewhere in the far corner of the vast open floor, going over their plan. Only a single guard remained at the door, at least 20 meters away, his back half turned, half attentive. Sophia leaned her cheek against the top of her daughter's curls and whispered so quietly her lips barely moved. "Papa is coming." "He's coming, sweetheart. Just be still." Emma nodded. She believed her. She always believed her mother. Then she lifted her small face and looked at the woman in the chair beside them. Emma had never seen Lucia before. Alessandro had been planning to bring them together at the end of the week. But the night before, on the drive back from Brooklyn to the Long Island estate, Sophia had sat on the edge of Emma's new bed and told her, slowly and carefully, about a grandmother named Lucia. Yes, the 2 of them had never met. Yes, in the past there had been misunderstandings between the grandmother and the mother, but she was still family. Emma had listened with the seriousness of a child receiving a secret, and she had remembered every word. Now, in the cold warehouse, Emma reached out and picked up the last plastic water bottle that lay on the concrete beside her. It had been tossed into the room earlier by one of Victor's men. She held it up toward Lucia's mouth. "Grandma, you need this more." Lucia looked at her. She could not speak. 62 years of her life, and she had never accepted anything from anyone without demanding something back in return. And yet this small, dark hand was holding out water to her, the woman who had driven this child's mother out of the city 7 years ago, who had regarded them as obstacles to the honor of a family name that this 6-year-old had never even heard. Lucia's throat closed. Emma tilted her head, watching. Then she looked more carefully at Lucia's shoulders. "Grandma, are you cold? I can share my shirt." She unwound the carrot-orange scarf from around her own small neck, the last warm thing on her body, and stood up on her stiff legs. She walked the 2 steps to Lucia's chair, and, with the careful hands of a child dressing a doll, she folded the scarf and set it across the old woman's shoulders. The wool still smelled faintly of biscotti and flour from that morning's kitchen. Lucia's tears began to fall. They came without sound. She did not permit herself sobs in front of enemies. But the tears kept coming, running one after another down the sharp lines of her cheeks. She could not make them stop. She turned her face toward Sophia. Her voice broke. "Sophia, I am sorry. I am sorry for all of it. I was wrong. I have been wrong for 7 years." Sophia did not speak. She only nodded, not forgiveness. Not yet, but acknowledgement. That was all Lucia could be given in this moment, and Lucia understood. Sometimes forgiveness does not come as a word. It comes as a nod, from a woman too tired to hate, and sometimes redemption does not come as a grand act. It comes as a small girl in a cold room, sharing her one scarf with the grandmother she has never met. Emma padded back to her mother and settled into her lap. She looked one more time at Lucia. She said, softly, the sentence she had practiced in her head the night before. "Grandma, I love you." It was the sentence Lucia would remember on the last day of her life. In the outer room, Victor was drinking espresso from a small paper cup, his face cold and untroubled. 400 meters to the west, at the derelict warehouse, 11 black cars rolled into the lot with their headlights cut. Alessandro stood on the tailgate of the SUV, one hand braced against the roof, while Bruno held a small tactical flashlight against his chest to light his face. 11 men stood before him in a half-circle on the cold concrete of the derelict lot. The oldest had walked with him for 18 years. The youngest had been with him for 7. None of them had asked why he had called them out into the Brooklyn dark at 4 a.m. None of them had asked what they would be paid. They waited. He gave them the plan in 4 minutes. 3 teams. Team 1, led by Enzo, would move by water. 4 men, 2 small rubber boats, launched from the abandoned pier, 100 meters north of Terminal 9. Their job was to cross under the seawall at 4:45 in the morning and cut the main power line feeding the entire Terminal 9 block. Team 2, led by Bruno, would move by land. 4 men. They would approach Terminal 9 from the main gate, dressed to appear as a routine harbor patrol. Their job was to be seen. Their job was to draw the bulk of Victor's men toward the front of the building. Team 3 would be led by Alessandro himself. Only 2 men would go with him, Marco and Raphael, both raised in his own house from the ages of 15 and 16. They would move through the old storm drain tunnel from the seawall directly into the sub-basement of Terminal 9. Only 2 men had ever known that tunnel existed. His father was dead. Alessandro was the other. Victor did not know. The 3 of them would reach the hostages before Victor knew the sub-basement had been breached. Alessandro looked at each of the 11 faces in front of him. If I don't come out of that building, you know who your next Don is. Not Victor. Enzo. Enzo lowered his head once. Bruno spoke, his voice a rough scrape. We'll bring you out. There's nothing else to discuss. Alessandro nodded. He handed each man a small wristwatch already synchronized to his own. He tapped the face of his. 4:12 in the morning. The strike would open at 4:45 exactly. 33 minutes. The men peeled off in small groups to check magazines, blades, wire cutters, and radios. Alessandro remained on the tailgate for a moment longer. He reached into his coat and pulled the carrot-orange scarf from the inner pocket. He held it a long time under the flashlight. He ran his fingers slowly along the knit, seed stitch. One up, one down, even as breath. Sophia had always knit that way. She had taught him to recognize it one afternoon 7 years ago, sitting beside him on a bench in Central Park, while she made a gray scarf for him with the same rhythm of her hands. He had kept that gray scarf. He had kept it in the bottom drawer of his desk for 7 years, without ever telling anyone, without ever telling himself why. He had believed, for 7 years, that she had betrayed him. He had been wrong. Tonight he would not be wrong. Bruno stepped close. His voice was quiet. Boss. One more thing. If Victor sees you before you see him, don't argue. Don't ask him anything. Put him down. Alessandro did not answer. He was thinking of the small girl in the warehouse 400 meters away, the child who had asked him at breakfast, only hours ago, if he was going to be around every day. He had said yes. He had promised her. He would keep the promise, even if keeping it meant putting a bullet into the man he had called brother for 15 years. He tucked the carrot-orange scarf into the inner breast pocket of his coat, against his chest, over his heart. The watch read 4:44. Enzo raised his hand into the air. The 3 teams split apart without a word and moved into the dark of the Brooklyn harbor. 4:45 in the morning. The lights of the entire Terminal 9 district went out at once. Every lamp on every pole, every warehouse lantern, every red glow along the seawall. Enzo's team had cut the main line to the second. Inside the warehouse, Victor swore in the dark and shouted for the backup generator. 30 seconds later, the generator exploded. Bruno had planted a small charge on the housing while pretending to walk the perimeter as harbor patrol. The blast tore through the outer wall and threw a wave of orange light across the water before it collapsed into black smoke. The warehouse went pitch dark. Victor and 18 of his gunmen began to move by memory. They knew every corridor of that main floor. They had rehearsed it. But Alessandro was not on the main floor. He was 2 levels beneath it, wading through the old storm drain tunnel with Marco ahead of him and Raphael behind. The dirty seawater was up to their calves. The tunnel stank of mold and iron. Rats brushed along the walls. None of the 3 men spoke. The only sound was the slow, careful slap of boots pushing water forward. They reached the iron hatch at the tunnel's end, the door that opened directly into the sub-basement of Terminal 9. Alessandro pressed his ear to the cold metal. Above him, through the plating, he heard Emma's small voice. She was whispering to her grandmother about Biscuit, telling Lucia that Biscuit was a rabbit, and that Biscuit had lost one ear once but Mama had sewn it back on. The sound of that whispered story steadied Alessandro's hands the way nothing else could have. He turned the hatch wheel slowly. It gave without a groan. His father had oiled these hinges once a year. The habit had outlived him. The guard at the far end of the storage room had his back partly turned. Marco crossed the concrete on soundless boots and put his knife through the man's throat before the man could turn his head. The body sagged silently against the wall. Alessandro was moving before the guard's knees hit the ground. He crossed the room in 5 strides and dropped to a knee beside the 2 chairs. His folding knife was already open in his hand. He cut Sophia's wrists free first, then Lucia's ankles, then Lucia's wrists. Sophia broke. She threw her arms around him and could not make a single word come out of her mouth. Emma launched off the concrete and buried her face in the front of his coat, both small fists locked in his lapel. He pressed his lips to the top of her curls. Not a sound. "Follow me. Do not let go of my hand." Above them, the gunfire began. Bruno's team hit the front of the building as loud as a marching band, bursts of automatic fire, small charges, shouts in 3 directions to draw attention. Enzo's team came in from the water and struck the rear positions from behind. Victor's men, already blind in the dark, found themselves squeezed between 2 jaws. Alessandro led the 3 of them back through the hatch and into the tunnel. Marco went first with his blade drawn. Raphael came last with his sidearm raised at the rear. Sophia carried Lucia on her back. The old woman was too weak to walk on her own after 8 hours in the chair. Emma clutched her father's left hand with both of hers. She waded through the black water on her small legs and did not make a single sound. They came up the far end of the tunnel and out into the rear service yard behind the warehouse. Victor was there. He was dragging his left leg. His right hand held the Beretta. He had guessed the tunnel. He had followed the sound of the boots in the water. His smile in the dark was not amused. It was unhinged. "Did you think I hadn't planned for the tunnel, Alessandro? I lived in your house for 15 years. I know every secret your family ever kept." Alessandro pushed Sophia, Emma, and Lucia behind him and stepped forward. Marco and Raphael spread out on both flanks without a word. He asked the last question, not to hear the answer, because Victor was owed the chance to say it. "Why, Victor?" Victor laughed. Not the cold laugh from the mirror. A real one. "Because I have lived in your shadow for 15 years, and that is 15 too many. You are the Don because you are Vincenzo Moretti's son, not because you deserve it. With my mind, I could run this family 10 times better than you ever have. All that had to happen tonight was that you die, and then I would prove it." Alessandro did not argue. He drew faster than Victor expected. 2 shots. Chest. Heart. Victor went down. His eyes were still open when he hit the ground. They stayed open, still not believing. Alessandro turned to check on the 3 of them behind him, but behind him, at the edge of the service yard, a last of Victor's men was crawling out from the tall grass along the fence line, lifting a black Glock with a shaking hand. The gunman leveled the Glock at Sophia. Alessandro had not yet turned. He was crouched over Emma, one arm curled around her small shoulders, shielding her from any last splinter of debris that might come from the firefight still crackling inside the warehouse walls. Marco and Raphael were angled the wrong way, both of them sweeping the opposite fence line, watching the rear approach. But Lucia saw, from her position just behind Sophia, the old woman saw the black barrel rise slowly out of the tall grass at the edge of the yard. She did not think. She did not calculate. She did not weigh what it would cost her. She ran. A woman of 62 years, her legs stiff and aching from 8 hours bound to a wooden chair, her tailored coat torn at the shoulder, ran forward across the concrete, the same woman who 7 years earlier had driven Sophia out of her son's life on the strength of a folder of addresses and a cup of espresso. She threw her body forward and put herself in front of Sophia. The bullet struck her high in the chest, slightly to the right, 3 centimeters from the heart. She fell. Alessandro turned. He fired twice at the man in the grass without straightening. 2 rounds, both to the head. The Glock dropped. So did the arm holding it. Then he was moving before the shells had finished ringing on the concrete. Sophia was already on her knees. Both her hands were pressed hard against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding with the pale fabric of her own coat. Warm blood was already running through her fingers. Emma stood close, her small hand still clutching the hem of her father's jacket, her gray eyes wide. She did not understand exactly what had happened. She only understood that her grandmother had just done something enormous. Alessandro dropped down and gathered his mother's head into his lap. Lucia opened her eyes. Her breath came shallow, her lips had gone pale, but she did not look at her son. She looked at Sophia. "Sophia, can you forgive me?" Sophia sobbed and nodded. her hands still not leaving the wound. Yes, Mama. I forgive you. Stay. Please, stay. Lucia lifted a shaking hand to the base of her own throat. She loosened the clasp of the fine gold chain she had worn every day for 40 years, the chain she had put on the morning of her wedding and had never once taken off for another human being. She drew it out with the small gold cross glinting in the dark and pressed it into Sophia's bloodied palm. For the child. Later, when she is old enough. Then she turned her face toward Emma. She lifted trembling fingers and touched the girl's cheek. Her fingertips were cold, but her eyes were warm. Nonna loves you, Emma. It was the first time, and the only time she called the child by name. Emma burst into tears. She did not understand all of it, but she understood, all the way down inside her small chest, that her grandmother had just told her she was loved for the first time. She leaned down and pressed a kiss to Lucia's cheek, a kiss as light as the touch of a butterfly. There are debts that cannot be paid in money, only in blood, and sometimes the last gift a person gives is not the gift they had promised. It is the one they had never intended to give at all. Lucia Moretti had spent 70 years proving she was strong. Tonight, she proved she could be sorry. Alessandro barked into the radio for Enzo. Enzo arrived in 2 minutes, with 2 cars. They lifted Lucia into the family ambulance that had been waiting at the mouth of the docks. Dr. Marcello Falcone had already flown in from Long Island when he first heard the shape of what was coming. The ambulance tore into the dark toward the private hospital of the family. Alessandro sat beside Sophia in the back. Emma sat curled in her mother's lap, one small hand still closed around the gold cross of her grandmother. He took Sophia's other hand. No one spoke, but inside that silence, something had begun to heal 7 years of loss, of misunderstanding, of hatred, dissolving into the steady wail of the siren above them. At the hospital, Dr. Falcone operated for 4 hours. The bullet had stopped 3 centimeters from the heart. She lived. When Lucia opened her eyes at dawn, the first person she saw was not her son. It was a small 6-year-old girl asleep against the edge of her bed, one hand still clutching the gold cross. Lucia smiled for the first time in more years than she could count. She lifted her hand and, very gently, stroked her granddaughter's curls. Sophia stood at the door, her eyes red but no longer weeping. She and Lucia did not speak. They did not need to. Everything that mattered had already been said the night before. 3 weeks later, in the garden of the Long Island estate, a white runner was laid across the autumn grass. It was a small wedding, not 300 guests. Only 30 the men who had stood beside Alessandro on the night of Terminal 9, Sophia's mother and brother who had flown in from Chicago that morning, Dr. Marcello Falcone in a tweed jacket that looked older than he was, Enzo in a dark suit that did not quite hide the sling on his right arm, and Bruno on a pair of polished wooden crutches, the wound in his thigh still not fully healed. There were no photographers. There were no business associates. There was only family. Lucia sat in the front row. A small IV line still ran into the back of her left hand, discreet under the cuff of her sleeve, but she had refused to miss this. She wore a simple black dress and pearls. Across her shoulders, folded neatly, was the carrot orange scarf. She had asked to keep it, as a reminder for the rest of her days. Emma was the flower girl. She walked slowly down the aisle in a pale blue dress her mother had sewn for her the week before, her curls tied back with a matching ribbon. She scattered white petals with the careful concentration of someone entrusted with something important. Around her small neck hung the little gold cross. Lucia had asked Sophia to fasten it there that morning, and Sophia had done so without a word. Sophia walked down the aisle in a simple white dress with no veil. Her curls fell loose over her shoulders. No one walked her down. Her father had passed the year before. She walked alone, as she had walked for 7 years. Alessandro waited at the end of the aisle. He was not in his usual dark suit. He wore a plain white shirt and a soft gray tie. When she reached him, he could not stop his eyes from filling. The minister spoke the vows. When it came time for the promise, Alessandro reached into his inside pocket and drew out the black leather wallet, the one Emma had returned to him in a parking lot 3 weeks earlier. He opened it. He took out the old photograph Coney Island, 7 years ago, and placed it on the small table beside them. Next to it, he laid a new photograph. Alessandro, Sophia, and Emma, taken in this same garden the week before. 2 pictures, side by side. 7 years between these 2 photographs, he said, his voice quiet but reaching every guest. 7 years I was wrong. 7 years I lived with a story that was not the truth. Sophia, for the rest of my life, I promise you I will not be wrong again. I promise, Emma. I promise, Mama. Sophia could not answer. She only nodded through her tears. He slid the ring onto her finger, his great-grandmother's ring, which Lucia had pressed into his palm at dawn, as her final word of acceptance. At the end of the ceremony, Emma ran forward from her small place at the front and slipped in between them. She took her mother's hand in one of hers and her father's hand in the other. She looked up at Alessandro with the solemn eyes of a small girl who had been waiting 6 years for this exact question. "Papa, is this our family now?" Alessandro knelt and pulled her into his chest. He nodded against her hair. "Yes, Emma, this is our family now. Forever." The three of them held one another under the soft light of the autumn afternoon. In the front row, Lucia rested her hand against the carrot-orange scarf on her shoulder, and she smiled the smile of a woman who had finally understood that a family, a true family, is not built by blood, but by love, and by the second chances people are brave enough to give to one another. Dear friends, this story carries a quiet but very powerful lesson. Sometimes the people we push away are the ones who would have saved us. Sometimes the family we try so hard to protect is the very family we destroy. And sometimes it only takes one small question from a 6-year-old girl, "Sir, is this your wallet?" to give a man back everything he thought he had lost forever. The honesty of a child in a worn-out coat can be worth more than the wealth of a lifetime. Pride and fear can steal 7 years from a father. Love and forgiveness can give them back in one night. Have you ever lost someone because of a misunderstanding you did not create? Have you ever been given a second chance you did not think you deserved? Do you have someone in your own life you have been waiting a long time to forgive, or to be forgiven by? Please tell us in the comments below. Share where you are watching from, and share your story. Every single comment is read, and every single one of them matters more than you know. If this story moved your heart tonight, please take a moment to give this video a like, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to our channel with the notification bell turned on, so you never miss the next story we bring you. New emotional stories are uploaded every day, and your support is what keeps this small corner of the internet alive. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the end. Goodbye for now, and we will see you very soon in the next video.